There's a place the maps forgot and God forsook, a hellish dip in the earth called Blood Ridge. It wasn't a town so much as a wound in the land, a cluster of shanties and sun-blasted buildings, clinging to the cracked dirt like scabs over old sins. The river that cut along its edge ran thick with poison, an oily, shimmering streak that stank of sulfur and dead fish, a place where horses refused to drink and men lost teeth from it. The sky above seemed forever choked with dust, a faded, colorless dome that made the days stretch long and the nights come heavy. Blood Ridge was a graveyard of good intentions, a sinkhole where outlaws, runaways, and broken men came to vanish. 10 for every one honest soul, if such a thing still existed this far out. The heart of it all, if it could be called that, was the Copper Crow, a sagging saloon with cracked shutters and a lopsided sign bearing the image of a crow, its paint peeled to the bone-gray wood beneath. Inside, the air clung heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, spilled liquor, and blood both old and fresh. The floor was layered with sawdust meant to soak up whatever fell, be it whiskey, spit, or teeth. Men crowded around crooked tables, faces half lit by flickering oil lamps, their laughter sharp and joyless. The piano in the corner sat silent, keys missing, a gnarled old drunk asleep against it like some forgotten corpse. Whiskey ran cheaper than water in the Copper Crow, and blood dried faster than sunlight. That was the only law in Blood Ridge, that a man with a coin in his pocket could do whatever the hell he pleased. And on this particular evening, as the sun bled out behind the jagged hills, a new cruelty took hold. Marla Dade was a name few bothered to remember. A scrap of a girl, wild-haired and hollow-eyed, with skin too pale for the sun-drenched land, and a frame like something the wind might snap in two. She was half-feral, a mutt with no collar, wandering the back alleys and empty stables for scraps. No one knew where she came from, and none cared. Folks reckoned she was an orphan left behind by some passing wagon train, though some whispered darker things about graveyards and old bones. That night, she'd made the mistake of slipping a bottle from behind the bar while the men drank deep and loud. A bottle of Cutter's Red, near empty, but precious all the same in a place where drink was life and water was death. She was spotted by a brute named Lyle Trask, a man with a beard like tangled rope and fists the size of kettle hams. His voice boomed over the noise, calling her a thieving little bitch, and the saloon fell quiet, like a blade drawn in the dark. They dragged her into the center of the floor, men clapping shoulders and grinning mean. Nobody stepped in. Not old Eli, the barber who'd buried 2 wives and drank to forget. Not Tessa, the worn-faced barmaid who knew every sin the town held and kept them close like rosary beads. Nobody, because in Blood Ridge, stepping in meant you took your place beside the doomed. Lyle struck first, his boot catching Marla in the ribs, lifting her clean off the ground. Another followed, then another, until the girl curled in on herself like a dying animal. Blood smeared the dirt, her lips split, her hair matted to her face. They jeered, spat, laughed. Someone suggested stringing her up, but Jared Cain, the saloon's owner and the closest thing to a king this town of wolves had, decided on something better. An old iron cage set out front, meant for dogs or mad drunks, though neither lasted long in it. They hauled Marla out by her tangled hair, her feet dragging, one shoe lost in the filth. Above the cage hung a battered wooden sign, "Whiskey $1 a glass." The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but no one spoke it. They threw her in, slammed the rusted latch, and left her there beneath the creaking sign, her blood marking the dust at her feet. Night came heavy, pressing down on Blood Ridge like a great, unseen hand. The sounds of the saloon swelled again, musicless and cruel, as if nothing had happened. The air turned colder, the wind carrying with it the stench of the poisoned river. Marla lay in the cage, shivering, a single eye swollen shut, a ragged cough hitching her chest. She stared up at the stars, wondering which one might belong to her mother, or if such things were lies they told to children. No one came for her. But then, from the distance, the soft, steady clop of hooves against hard-packed earth. A figure materialized from the night haze, a rider alone, dust clinging to his coat like a second skin. His horse was lean and long-legged, its flanks streaked with road grime. The man rode easy, No hurry in him. A wide-brimmed hat hiding half his face, the other half a mask of stubble and shadow. On his saddle, a worn Bible. At his hip, nothing but his fists, scarred and wrapped in old leather. The townsfolk who noticed him felt something stir in their gut, the kind of unease that came when the air stilled before a storm. The rider passed a broken fence post where an old coyote skull hung, and the saloon's door swung slightly in the wind as if offering invitation. He rode straight for the Copper Crow, but his eyes, dark as pitch and sharp as whetted stone, fixed first upon the girl in the cage, and he did not ride past. The man was no stranger to places like this, dust-blasted outposts, where law meant the strength of your fists and the speed of your draw. His arrival in Blood Ridge was neither fast nor loud, but it turned heads just the same. The preacher came riding a long-legged roan, its ribs showing beneath the stretched hide, a creature that looked half-starved but still carried itself proud. Dust clung to his coat like another layer of skin, his hat drooping low to shade eyes sharp as broken glass. A jagged scar ran beneath his left jaw, an ugly thing like a split in old leather, half concealed by the heavy stubble on his chin. His hands were what most folks noticed, wrapped tight in leather bindings, cracked and dark from age, stained by things best left unmentioned. Those who recognized him didn't say so aloud. Not here. But the name whispered in saloons, in mining camps, in whorehouses clinging to the edge of nowhere, floated through the crowd before he even stepped off his horse. The Bare-Knuckle Preacher. Some said he was a war deserter. Others claimed he once ran with the notorious Larimore gang, a ghost from the outlaw days turned man of God. All agreed on one thing. He preached with his fists, converted with the butt of a rifle, and buried his enemies in unmarked graves. A man who believed salvation wasn't something you asked for. It was something you earned through blood. Blood Ridge had seen its fair share of dangerous men, but none quite like him. He tied his roan to a post outside the Copper Crow and took a long look around. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of sweat, gun oil, and fear. Men at the saloon's entrance stiffened, spitting tobacco into the dust, their eyes darting anywhere but his face. Women shrank into the shadows of doorways. Children vanished like smoke. It was then he saw her, the girl in the cage. She lay crumpled on her side, one swollen eye cracked open, the other purple and shut. Blood clung to her temple, dried like rust. Her bare feet smeared the dust beneath her. Above her head, the sign creaked in the wind. Whiskey $1 a glass. He stepped toward the cage, slow and steady, like a man approaching a sleeping snake. The preacher knelt, the old leather of his duster sighing as he crouched. The girl coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and blinked up at him. "What's your name, child?" His voice was gravel rubbed against old wood, low and rough. She stared a moment before her lips cracked open. "Marla, what did you do to end up here?" Her good eye flicked toward the saloon doors. "Wouldn't spread my legs for Cain's boys," she rasped. "Took a bottle instead. Figured it'd hurt less." He nodded, a movement small as a twitch. The saloon door swung open then, and out stepped a man built like a bull, his belly pressing against a filthy linen shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Jared Cain. His beard was thick and greasy, a tangle of gray and black. A bloodied cleaver hung from his belt beside a rusted revolver. His eyes were mean and small, sunk deep into a face battered by years of drink and war. "Well, well," Cain called, voice thick as molasses. "A man of God graces us. We don't see many collars in Blood Ridge, preacher." The preacher stood slowly, his face unreadable. "I don't wear a collar." Cain laughed, a sour, braying sound. Men filtered out behind him, half-drunk and armed, forming a loose semicircle. Faces hardened by the land, by the river, by the knowledge that no one outside Blood Ridge gave a damn what happened here. "Guess not." Cain grinned. "Still, you look like the type enjoys sticking his nose where it don't belong. You best keep riding." "The girl's mine." "She's a child. She's a thief and a whore. Ain't neither worth a grave out here." The preacher's hand drifted to the Bible at his hip, fingers brushing its cracked leather cover. "Scripture says, 'Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed.'" Isaiah 10, verse 1. Cain's lip curled, You plannin' to read me to death, preacher?" "No," the preacher said softly, stepping forward, his shadow falling across the cage. "I came for the wicked, and your time's run out." The men behind Cain tensed, hands straying to the hilts of knives and pistols. Cain sneered, "Ain't no law here but me, and I say you've got till sundown to clear the ridge, preacher, else you'll find yourself in a hole beside her." "I don't plan on leaving." A long silence stretched between them, thick as gun smoke. Cain held his ground a moment longer, then spat into the dirt. "Your funeral." He turned, waving his men back inside. They filed in reluctantly, some casting uneasy glances at the preacher. No one spoke. When the doors shut, the preacher knelt again. "You should ve done that," Marla whispered. "He'll kill you. Wouldn't be the first to try." She hesitated, then leaned closer, a tremor in her voice. "They buried a wagon train here. 20 people, men, women, babies, came through with a gold shipment meant for Fort Dunn. Cain and his men butchered him, burned the wagons, took the gold, buried the dead under the Copper Crow's floor. Ain't nobody dared dig since." The preacher's face didn't change, but something cold flickered in his gaze. "Why tell me?" "Because I think maybe you're the one who don't run." Without a word, he reached for a rusted crowbar leaning against a barrel nearby. The preacher worked the latch loose, the metal shrieking. Marla winced as the door swung open. "Can you walk?" "I can crawl." He scooped her up instead, light as a rag doll in his arms, and carried her to the edge of the saloon's porch. A dozen pairs of eyes watched from inside, faces half lit by lamplight, none bold enough to step out. The preacher set her down gently, passed her a canteen from his saddle. The water was warm, tasted of leather and iron, but she drank greedily. He looked back at the saloon. "I'll be seeing you at sundown, Cain." The wind picked up, rattling loose shutters. Somewhere a dog howled. Blood Ridge had seen killings, fires, floods, but it had never seen a man like this. Not a man who promised wrath in the name of God, and not one who meant it. The old chapel crouched at the far edge of Blood Ridge, like a dying man too stubborn to fall. Its steeple sagged, the bell long gone, leaving only a splintered frame that reached crooked fingers toward a starless sky. Most of its windows had been smashed, jagged remnants of colored glass, glinting in the moonlight. Dust coated the pews inside, and a film of cobwebs clung to the rafters like brittle lace. No one had prayed here in years. If there had ever been a God watching over this town, he'd turned his face away long ago. The preacher laid Marla down in the last pew near the altar, his movements careful despite the stiffness in his limbs. She bit back a groan, her ribs bruised and her lips split, her hair still crusted with dried blood. The old place smelled of dry wood and old sins. It was the only spot in Blood Ridge where Jared Cain's reach didn't feel immediate, though the weight of his name still hung in the air like smoke. Marla shivered despite the warmth of the lingering night. "You should have left," she whispered. The preacher crouched beside her, one hand adjusting the leather wrap around his knuckles. His face was a study in shadows and half-light, eyes dark as storm clouds, that jagged scar beneath his jaw catching a glint of moonlight. "I've been running my whole life," he said. "A man gets tired." She stared at him for a long moment, the silence between them stretching thin. Then, as if the weight of it was too much to carry anymore, the words tumbled out. "You don't know what this place is, what it's done. Cain is men. They ain't just drunks and cutthroats. Years back, before even old Eli was limping around with his glass eye, a wagon train rolled through here. 20, maybe 30 folks. Settlers heading west, wagons loaded down with grain, tools, a bit of gold meant for Fort Dunn, enough to start a town of their own." She swallowed hard, as though the memory tasted bitter. Jared Cain and his men rode out in the dead of night, slit the throats of the guards first. Then the men, one by one, didn't spare the women or the children. Every last soul, butchered like hogs, stole the gold, burned the wagons to ash. Her voice cracked. "They buried him under the Copper Crow. Dug a pit, deep enough the wolves wouldn't dig him up. 20 years and no one speaks of it, but it's still there. Bones and old wedding rings, babies' teeth, rusted rifle barrels. That's what holds this town together. That's what you're standing on every time you walk past that saloon." The preacher said nothing for a long while. His hand brushed the edge of the Bible at his hip, not to open it, but like a man reminding himself it was there. "They say the gold was cursed," Marla went on, "that every man who's touched it started dying slow, wasting away, turning meaner than they were. Cain don't age like a normal man. His face sags, but his eyes, they ain't changed. Travelers that stop here, they vanish. No one leaves unless he says so. I've been trying. For years, I've been trying." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And now you're next." The preacher stared at the cracked altar, the faded cross above it barely visible. When he finally spoke, his voice was like gravel poured over stone. "I knew a place like this once," he said. "Another war, another lifetime. A town that burned and no one remembered. I wore a different name then, wielded a hangman's noose and a saber, carved justice into the flesh of men and left their bodies in the dust." His gaze found hers. "I was a butcher, and when the killing was done, the dead followed me. I couldn't sleep without their eyes watching. So I took up the good book, swapped a noose for scripture, a blade for my fists. Figured if I couldn't save myself, maybe I could save the ones no one else would." He flexed his scarred hands. "Places like Blood Ridge are shadows, girl. And the only thing shadows fear is a man who don't run." Marla's throat worked as she fought down a surge of fear. "You can't fight them all. You seen how many there are. Even if you kill Cain, you think they'll let you walk out of here?" "Don't aim to walk," he said softly. Marla shook her head, tears burning in her good eye. "You're a damn fool." The preacher gave a small, grim smile. "Most men worth remembering are." Outside, the town breathed like a wounded animal. Lamps still flickered in windows. The copper crow bled light and bitter laughter into the streets. But tension had thickened the air like a coming storm. Word had traveled fast. Blood Ridge wasn't a place that valued courage, but even cowards felt the itch of unease in their bones. Some folks muttered prayers to dead gods. Others loaded rifles with shaking hands. And Cain's men gathered. In the back room of the Copper Crow, Jared Cain spat tobacco into a rusted spittoon and looked over his gathered killers. 7 men, mean as starved wolves, with sweat-darkened shirts and hands calloused from rope and blood. A few faces were missing teeth. All of them carried iron. "Come dawn," Cain said, his voice a low growl. "I want that preacher hanging from the crossbeam by his heels. Put a bullet in the girl if you see her. I don't want no sermons. No speeches. You find em, you kill em." Lyle Trask, still nursing a swollen jaw from the afternoon scuffle, grunted. "Ain't no preacher worth all this trouble." "He ain't no preacher," Cain snapped. "He's a storm, and storms drown men like you, boy." They loaded their guns. Marla, meanwhile, had slipped from the chapel as the night thickened. The preacher had fallen into a half-sleep, sitting upright, his back against the wall, his Bible in his lap. She crept out, cradling a knife she'd found wedged beneath a pew. Rusty, but sharp enough. She knew what kind of men Cain sent, and she knew that come dawn, there'd be no mercy for either of them. If she could reach the edge of town, to the old arroyo where the sagebrush grew thick and the ground turned to red rock, she might have a chance. Might. She didn't believe in luck, not anymore, but she did believe in survival. The streets were mostly empty. A couple of drunkards staggered near the livery. She kept to the shadows, heart pounding in her throat. Blood Ridge seemed to watch her as she moved, the old buildings leaning inward like eavesdropping old men. She made it to the edge of the livery when a hand shot out from the dark and clamped down on her wrist. "Well now," a voice slurred. "Ain't you the little rat we've been looking for?" Lyle Trask grinned, a broken-toothed sneer in the pale light. 2 other men stepped out behind him, one carrying a length of chain. "Cain says you ain't to see another sunrise." Marla kicked, drove her boot into Lyle's shin, but he barely flinched. The chain rattled as one man grabbed her around the waist. "Boss'll be real pleased." Her scream was cut short as a rough hand clamped over her mouth. The night swallowed them whole, and Blood Ridge went on breathing. Dawn came slow over Blood Ridge, a weak and watery light, pushing through the haze of dust that hung in the air like a gauze shroud. The poisoned river shimmered dull and lifeless, and the town lay still, holding its breath as though it, too, waited for something to break. The Copper Crow stood as it always had, leaning slightly to one side, shutters crooked, the weather-beaten sign above its door swaying in a wind that hadn't moved all night. Inside, the air was thick with stale liquor, old sweat, and the metallic tang of anticipation. Cain's men sat scattered around the saloon, guns within reach, jaws tight, eyes flicking to the door every few seconds. The tension clung to the walls like soot. Then, as the sun's first weak rays touched the ridge, the door creaked open. The preacher stepped through, his silhouette cut clean against the light. Dust clung to his duster, the brim of his hat low over his eyes, one hand resting lightly against the Bible on his hip, the other tightening the worn leather wraps around his fists. His face was stone. The scar at his jaw caught a streak of dawn like a brand. He moved forward without a word. Jared Cain stood behind the bar, a cleaver in one hand and a pistol in the other, his eyes narrowing. Around him, 7 men shifted in their chairs, each one bristling like a hound on a short chain. "Kill him," Cain snarled. The room exploded. A chair smashed against the preacher's shoulder as the nearest man lunged. The preacher's fist met his jaw with a crack like a splitting log, teeth flying as the man crumpled to the floor. Another came in swinging a bottle. It shattered against the preacher's back, but he was already turning, grabbing the man by the throat, driving him headfirst into a table that splintered under the weight. The saloon became a storm of fists and wood and blood. The preacher fought like a man possessed, no wasted movement, no mercy. His knuckles, wrapped in cracked leather, hammered through teeth and bone. A heavy-set brute tried to rush him, and the preacher sidestepped, caught him by the hair, and drove his face into the bar's edge. Blood splashed across the counter. Glass shattered. A bottle flew past the preacher's head and smashed against the wall, spraying whiskey and shards. He ducked under a wild swing, brought his elbow up into a man's throat, then finished him with a knee to the gut. The last 2 hesitated. One made a break for the door, but the preacher caught him by the back of his shirt, yanked him off his feet, and sent him sprawling into a pile of overturned chairs. The other raised a trembling pistol, but his hand shook so bad the shot went wide, blasting a lamp off the wall. The preacher closed the distance in 3 long strides and struck the man's wrist. The pistol clattered to the floor. A final blow to the side of the head left him unconscious, face down in the spilled liquor. And then it was just Cain. He hadn't moved from behind the bar, though the cleaver's edge trembled slightly in his grip. "Think you're a holy man," Cain spat, his voice a ragged snarl. "You ain't nothing but a killer with a book." The preacher's chest rose and fell, blood from split knuckles staining the leather wraps. He said nothing, stepping slowly around the broken furniture and bleeding bodies. In the far corner, Marla hung from a rough rope lashed to a wall hook, her wrists raw, a rag stuffed in her mouth, eyes wide. She struggled against the bonds, the rusted nail she'd pried from a floorboard hidden in her palm. The preacher's eyes flicked to her, then back to Cain. "Let her go," he said, his voice low as distant thunder. "Not a chance." Cain grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Soon as you fall, she's next. Always been the way. Always will be." The preacher stepped closer. Cain lunged. The cleaver flashed, catching the light of the flickering lamps. The preacher twisted aside, but the blade bit into his side, a hot line of fire, searing through flesh. He grunted, staggered, but didn't fall. Cain raised the cleaver again. The preacher's fist cracked against his jaw, the blow snapping Cain's head to the side. The cleaver clattered to the floor. The preacher grabbed him by the collar, drove his knee into Cain's gut, and slammed him against the bar. Bottles toppled and shattered. Cain clawed for a pistol at his belt. Marla's hands worked furiously at the rope, the nails sawing through the fibers. Blood slicked her fingers. The rope gave with a final tug, and she yanked the gag free. "Hey, bastard," she screamed. Cain turned just in time to catch the bottom of a heavy glass bottle as Marla hurled it with every ounce of strength she had left. It struck his temple with a dull, sickening crack. Jared Cain staggered back, arms flailing, blood streaking his face. His legs buckled. He collapsed in a heap behind the bar, a final rattling breath leaving his throat. Silence settled like dust. The preacher leaned against the bar, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. He stared down at Cain's body, then at the shattered remains of the saloon. Men groaned on the floor, too broken to rise. The door creaked open. A handful of townsfolk had gathered, drawn by the noise. Tessa the barmaid, old Eli with his glass eye, the blacksmith others. Faces pale, eyes wide. The preacher straightened, blood still seeping between his fingers. "Dig," he rasped. No one moved. "Dig," he said again, louder, his voice cutting through the thick, sour air. "Under this floor." "Now." Tessa stepped forward, pale as chalk. "Preacher, what?" "You heard him," Marla said, her voice raw but steady. She picked up the discarded cleaver, held it loosely at her side. "Do it." Tools were fetched. Crowbars, picks, shovels. The floorboards groaned as they were pried up one by one. Dust swirled. The earth beneath was packed hard and dark, but not deep enough. The first bones appeared within minutes. A child's femur. A woman's skull, long hair still clinging in places. Bits of tattered clothing. Rusted metal buttons, the dull gleam of a locket, a gold coin streaked with black. A terrible silence gripped the room. Faces went white. Some folks wept. Others dropped their tools and backed away, horror blooming in their eyes. The preacher said nothing. He just watched, his face hollow and lined with pain, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. Marla stood beside him, a smear of blood across her temple, the cleaver in her hand. Tessa dropped to her knees and sobbed. Old Eli muttered a prayer through trembling lips. The town of Blood Ridge finally saw its sins. And for the first time in years, the morning wind smelled like rain. The preacher sat against the bloodstained bar, his breathing shallow, the front of his coat dark with blood. The wound at his side bled slow but steady, a deep cut that had gone too far. His face was pale in the dim morning light, eyes half-lidded but sharp, watching the townsfolk unearth the grave he'd known would be there. Marla knelt beside him, her hands slick with dirt and blood, the cleaver discarded at her side. She pressed a rag against his wound, though they both knew it wasn't enough. "You're not going to make it," she whispered, her voice breaking. The preacher gave a faint, humorless smile. His lips cracked. "Ain't the first time someone said that," he rasped. "Who are you, really?" The question hung between them, thick and heavy like gun smoke. The preacher's eyes drifted to his hands, those scarred, leather-wrapped fists that had ended men and saved others. Slowly, he unwrapped them, the stiff leather strips falling away like shed skin. Beneath, his knuckles were hard, the skin ridged and pale, but it was the tattoos that caught her eye. Faded, crude markings inked in a time before most in Blood Ridge had been born. Letters scrawled across the base of each finger. A crude symbol on the back of one hand, a hangman's noose. She knew those marks. Everyone west of the Mississippi did. The old gangs may have died, but their ghosts lived on in stories, in whispered names around campfires. "I rode with the Black Hollow boys," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. Name was Elias Ward. You might have heard it once. Marla's breath caught. Even in a town like this, the name Elias Ward had weight. A killer's name. A butcher from the war years, a man who'd left trails of bodies in his wake and vanished like a devil into the desert. "I thought you were dead," she managed. "I was," he murmured, "or might as well have been." He swallowed hard, wincing at the pain. "Years back, I married a woman named Claire. She was kind, soft where I was hard, light where I was nothing but shadow. Thought maybe I could crawl out of what I'd been. Put down the gun, leave the gang. But a man like me don't get to live clean." He coughed, a wet sound. "She left ahead of me with a wagon train, bound for Fort Dunn. Meant to meet her there. But I was late. Always late. Heard about a massacre along the trail. Took me near a year to learn it was here. Jared Cain and his dogs butchered them for gold." His voice cracked. She was buried beneath that saloon. All this time, and no one spoke her name. Marla felt tears sting her eyes, the pain of it cutting through her like a hot blade. She took his hand, gripping it tight. "You came here for her," she whispered. He nodded once. "And for me." A moment passed before his gaze found hers again. "You'll see this place, right?" "I swear it," she said, choking on the words. "Good girl," he murmured, closing his eyes. "Some men, they carry the light. Others crawl through hell with bloodied fists to find it." His chest rose once, then fell, and it didn't rise again. Marla bowed her head, her tears hot against the dust-caked floor. She stayed like that until the last of the sun's rays stretched across the ruined saloon. By midday, the townsfolk gathered what was left of their courage. Tessa, old Eli, the blacksmith, a dozen others who'd once cowered in Cain's shadow, stood with Marla at the center of town. The copper crow loomed behind them, windows broken, floorboards ripped open to the shame beneath. No one spoke. Marla lit the torch herself. She stood before the saloon, the flickering flame licking at the air. Her eyes were rimmed red, her face smudged with ash and old blood. She didn't tremble as she touched the torch to the wall. The dry, cracked wood took to flame fast, roaring up in a rush of smoke and heat. The building went up like it had been waiting years for the match. They watched it burn. No one tried to save it. No one mourned. By nightfall, the copper crow was nothing but blackened timber and a heap of smoldering ash. The poisoned earth beneath it hissed and steamed. Marla stood by Elias Ward's grave the next morning. They'd buried him on a rise overlooking Blood Ridge, beneath a crooked, wind-bent tree. The earth was dry and mean, but they managed to cut a hole deep enough. No fancy stone, no marker, but a rough plank of wood with a name scrawled in charcoal black letters. Elias Ward. He broke the devil's hold. The wind howled through the grassless hills. Marla left a strip of the preacher's old leather wraps, tied to a branch. She promised him out loud she'd remember, even if no one else did. In the weeks that followed, Blood Ridge changed. Tessa took up tending the wounded. Old Eli melted down the pistols left behind, forging nails and horseshoes instead. And Marla, fierce, scarred Marla, reopened the old chapel. She scrubbed the blood from its floors, cleared the cobwebs, lit new lamps. Folks came one by one, not for sermons, for shelter, for a place that wasn't ruled by fear. And no woman in that town, not one, ever took a boot or a fist again. Marla watched over them like a matron of rough mercy. The girl who'd once bled beneath a whiskey sign became the one to see the lost find their way. And though the poison river still ran, and the land stayed hard, Blood Ridge began to remember what it was to breathe. Some nights, when the wind whistled just right through the canyons, folks swore they could hear a rough, broken voice carried with it, speaking a scripture meant for devils. Some men are born to carry the light. Others crawl through hell with bloodied fists to find it.